I normally like to start a session on a positive note, but unfortunately I can't this time. The state of developer experience is in serious decline. Now I'm going to start off by being very upfront with you guys, and I'm going to share some stats straight off the bat. My role at Atlassian, I speak with a lot of developers, a lot of engineers, a lot of engineering leaders, and they've been sharing some feedback with me, and it's formulated into a stat that I found. I'm going to share that with you right now. The number of ping pong tables per company is in serious decline, and this is making developers very upset. How can companies expect developers to have a positive experience without ping pong tables? Where are code reviews supposed to happen? How can they be healthy and live healthy lives without some physical exercise? Now, to make this matters worse, this upsets me a lot. Did you know that now more than 50% of pizzas sold in the US are frozen? So even if you're lucky enough to work at a company that gives you pizza, it's probably frozen. It's a sad state of affairs for developer experience. Quick show of hands, who's noticed a decline in ping pong tables and pizza? Yep, just like I thought. So if you thought I was going to be up here talking about ping pong and pizza, you're wrong. Those things are important, but a good developer experience is not about ping pong and pizza.
So if it's not ping pong, not pizza, or not even pinball machines, because that's what I like better than ping pong. So what is developer experience? So let's align on the definition of developer experience. Developer experience is how devs think and feel about the tools, the processes, and the framework that they use to build software. Why is this even important? Why should this be something that companies care about? Software is increasingly becoming the mechanism by which companies interact with their customers and work with their customers. So pretty much every company is a software company. And this sort of helps us understand why developer experience is important. Research shows that positive developer experience plays a key role in employee satisfaction. This affects hiring top talent and retaining top talent. In addition, this results in higher quality software and leads to developer joy and happier developers, which in turn results in improved productivity. If you put all of this together, you make things more efficient. What you find is that it turbocharges innovation. When your cycle times are small, when you remove friction, this leads to a culture of experimentation and learning, which just makes it better for customers.
So at Atlassian, we're on our own developer experience journey. And earlier this year, we wanted to get a fresh look at how people are thinking about developer experience. Specifically, we wanted to learn about the state of developer experience across the world. We want to know what was getting in the way of a good developer experience and what's working for different companies and different people. And of course, we're living in probably the year of AI, so we wanted to understand what impact is AI having on developer experience. So we partnered with two companies, DX and Wakefield, and we surveyed 2,150 developers and leaders. We analysed those results and we shared a full report in July this year. So the QR code, I can see most of you scanning it already. You can download the full report at that QR code. I'll just give you a quick second to grab that if you want it. All right. So in this session today, Preeti and I are going to explore the three high-level themes that we discovered through our analysis in the data that we collected. We're going to review some of those key stats and the associated insights that come with that. And we're going to discuss what we're doing at Atlassian to improve our own developer experience for our developers. So the first key theme that we're going to explore is that we found there was a huge misalignment between developers and their leaders. Next, we're going to take a look at how people are measuring developer experience and some of the interesting benefits associated with actually measuring it. And finally, we're going to take a look at the role of AI in developer experience, and we're going to take a look at how it can play a role in improving developer experience if it's applied in the right areas. All right, so let's start with the huge misalignment between developers and their leaders. Our first major finding, we asked developers and leaders, what are the things that are getting in the way of a positive developer experience? So the top 5 answers from leaders were understaffing, expansion of the developer role, so that's developers needing to know more and do more as a part of being a modern day developer. New technology, so needing to learn new things like AI and machine learning. Switching context and collaborating with other teams. When we ask engineers what's getting in the way of a positive developer experience, the number one thing they said was tech debt. Then documentation, lack of time for deep work, build processes, and lack of clear direction. Put your hand up if you're an engineer. All right, put your hand up if you're an engineering leader. And now put your hand up if these things resonate with you. Everyone, perfect. So one obvious consequence of this misalignment is that you can't improve developer experience if you don't know what the friction points are that your developers are facing. Now, I speak with a lot of CTOs who are on a mission to improve developer experience for their developers. So the intent is there to improve developer experience. And these CTOs have a very limited budget to do that. They can't spend their entire budget on improving the experience. So imagine spending the little budget that you have on improving developer experience on fixing the wrong problems. Or, which I see quite often, fixing the right problems wrong. So let's look at an example. Let's take the number one problem that leaders said was getting in the way of a good developer experience. So they said understaffing is the biggest problem that their developers are facing. Now, what do you think the solution is to understaffing? You just hire more engineers, right? Easy solution if you can hire more. But what happens to the developers when you hire more engineers? Look at tech debt. Is it going to fix tech debt? It'll probably accelerate how much tech debt you have. Is it going to improve documentation? No, unless you have a cultural shift that results in everyone writing more documentation and reading it, then that's not going to fix that either. And if anything, it'll probably reduce the amount of time you have for deep work because you need to interview engineers, you need to onboard them, you need to handhold them while they become productive in your company. So you can see how a misunderstanding on what the problems are can lead to you making the problems even worse for your developers. Engineering leaders aren't aware of the actual issues that developers are facing. Only 44% of developers in our survey said that they think their leaders know what the problems are that they're facing on a daily basis. 44%, that's not even half. And they're right. Throughout the survey, we found different points of data which showed us that there's a huge disconnect between these two groups of people. We're going to come back to AI a little bit later on, but this was another point of misalignment between engineers and their leaders. In our survey, leaders said AI is the most effective way to improve developer experience and job satisfaction and productivity for their developers. But when we asked developers, only 62% of developers are yet to see any productivity gain through using AI. Pretty big difference there in views. There was one thing though that engineers and their leaders both agreed on. They both agree that developer experience is important. 86% of leaders said that a good developer experience is critical to attracting and retaining top talent. 63% of developers say that they consider the developer experience in their company when they are determining whether they should leave the company or if they should stay. So everyone agrees, if you want to retain and attract top talent, you need a positive developer experience. Now, when I speak to leaders on this topic, they most often talk to me about attracting new talent, which is good. Of course, everybody wants to attract new and really good talent to their company. Nobody ever mentions this to me about retaining the talent they already have. And if you ask me, that's more important. Because think about what happens when you lose top talent. Yes, you have a loss of IP and you have a good person leaving your company. But you need to then spend time recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and after you get through all that, they might not even be a fit for the role. They might be a wrong fit, so you have to go through that process again. Also, what happens to the engineers that stay in your company when someone who's really good leaves? Everyone else has to take on more load. And think about the productivity hit that comes with that. So yes, developer experience, a good one, is important to attracting top talent, but more importantly, it's important to retain the talent you already have. So another key role for a leader is to help their teams be as productive as possible. I'm going to scare the leaders that are here now. Our survey shows that 69% of developers are losing 8 hours per week due to inefficiencies. 22% are losing 12 or more hours a week. 10% are losing more than 16 hours a week on inefficiencies. Now that should be very scary to any leader to hear that most of your employees are losing one whole day a week, so they could take Monday off because they're not doing anything but dealing with inefficiency. And 10% are losing 2 days. So that's a huge problem. All right, I've shared heaps of stats so far, but what does all of that mean? It means we need ping pong tables back as soon as possible. No. When I take a step back and I consider the stats that I've shared and all the conversations I have with different CTOs, this is what's happening. Developers are dealing with huge amounts of friction. Like I said, most developers are losing at least 1 day a week to inefficiency. Leaders don't have a good understanding of what those inefficiencies are or what those friction points are. Now, we saw this misalignment in, like I said, in various points in our survey. And half of the developers that we surveyed said their leaders don't understand what their challenges are. So then what happens? The investment that they have, and they are genuinely trying to improve developer experience, but it's going into the wrong areas, or they're fixing the right problems in the wrong way. Now, this is the point in time where developer experience doesn't improve, productivity starts to decline, and one thing is that developers actually want to be productive, so there's just things getting in the way of that. Top talent gets harder to retain, and more load is added to the existing engineering teams that are there. Now, at this point in time, someone in the company says, you know what, I think we should start measuring developer productivity. This is the bad developer experience cycle, and it's very common in companies that I speak with. Now, you can see pretty clearly where things are going wrong here. Having a deep understanding of the problems that developers are facing and the friction points is the key to breaking this cycle. So, how do you break the cycle? The first step is always ask your developers. If you ask your developers, how can we improve the way we deliver software here, you will not stop them from telling you. Everyone has this fear about asking developers. You don't know how they're going to react. But trust me, I've done this. I've spent 2 weeks full time just asking developers, how can we improve the way we develop software here? And I ended up with a 2-year backlog, not at Atlassian, a different company. So if you ask them, they'll definitely tell you. Now that doesn't scale. I was working in a company with thousands of engineers. I'm not going to ask everybody, how do we improve the way we deliver software? So that's when you go to a survey. And a survey is a great way to take what you think you know from speaking with people and scaling that out. Using a survey, you can find out how much of a problem is this. Is everyone having this problem, or is it localized to one area of your engineering org? And finally, measure and baseline the points of friction that you have. This is the way you quantify the problem and understand if you're making progress towards resolving this problem through the things that you choose to work on.
So Andrew shared some of our learnings from the State of Developer Experience report. So I'm going to switch and talk to you about what we do at Atlassian when we look at our own developer experience. Our CTO made a bet that focusing on developer joy improves developer productivity. And that's how we've been approaching it. So let's take a look at this. As Andrew mentioned, the first thing to improving developer experience is to get clear understanding about the points of friction for your organization. So we run quarterly surveys that go out to 5,000 plus developers, and we get a 90% survey completion rate. When we share this stat, people are usually surprised that we actually get such a high survey completion rate. So hold on to that thought because we're going to talk about it. So what do we ask in these surveys, right? So it's a combination of both structured questions and open-ended questions. For the structured questions, we ask about the inner dev loop, the outer dev loop, build, CI/CD, testing frameworks, access to documentation, and a few other things that bubble up to the top of our list of priorities. In addition to these structured questions where we are getting a scaled feedback from devs, we also have space for open-ended feedback. And we found that approximately 20% of survey participants do give us this open-ended feedback. And so this combination has proven to be very useful. Let me give you an example. Through this open-ended survey, one of the things that we found out was the tool that we were using for progressive deploys was actually resulting in a lot of friction. And we understood that from this survey. So that learning allowed us to invest in making that better and to solve that point of friction. So we run these surveys, we get a general pulse check, we identify the top areas of friction based on this survey. And once we have these learnings, it gives us the ability to do two things. One is we do have central teams that are working on improving developer experience for all developers in the organization. The second part of it is that each engineering leader does get insight into the specific problems for their particular team or department. So at Atlassian, we get roughly 10% of time where we are asked, encouraged, required to focus on improving developer experience for our own teams. So this combination of a global focus, a centralized focus, along with localized empowerment where I, as an engineering leader, can go in, look at the survey results and figure out where I need to invest in to improve developer experience for my particular team. Because if my team is struggling with test flakiness, it doesn't mean that every other team is struggling with test flakiness. And so this combination works really well. Once we've identified these pain points and we start investing into this, you have to close the loop with developers. And this is what makes a difference in those survey participation rates. You have to go back, and we go back and we ask our devs to understand if their feedback was addressed. What did they tell us? Have they noticed any change in these friction points based on the investments that we've made? We have a central developer productivity program where people from all different departments or teams are part of this central program. We share learnings with each other. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out that tells us what's going on across different parts. So it's a really great way for us to learn from each other. And we also ask devs if their direct managers are, how do their direct managers think about developer experience? Are they focusing on it? Are they noticing any change? So we've found that this loop, closing the loop, gives us the credibility to go back. And when we keep nudging people to take surveys, which is, anybody who's taken a mandatory survey knows that that's one of the things, that actually people want to tell us what's going on because they know we are paying attention to it. One of our company values is open company, no bullshit. And this goes for the points of friction that we identify also. The first thing that we do is, in addition to these qualitative measures, we are baselining the current status, and we make these metrics available to every single developer. Compass is Atlassian's developer experience platform. Through this platform, developers have access to the metrics for the components that they own, all available through this internal developer portal. You can think of things like, DORA metrics, your quality metrics. All of these are accessible, and having visibility into these metrics tells us whether the investments that we are making are paying off. And this is another critical way to close the loop. So let's talk about another example. One of the things that we found with our surveys is that devs were talking about the amount of friction in the PR review time. I mean, I'm sure you've all been there. You send a PR out for review, reviews take a long time, you've already switched tasks, you've switched contexts, and overall it takes you much longer to get the job done. At the surface level, we could have set a KR and said, just get it done faster, we're going to give you SLAs on a PR review. But that doesn't stop the problem, and when we took time to understand it further, we realized that there were other better, more elegant ways of making this, reducing this friction. So we developed Auto Review. Auto Review is your AI-powered code review assistant. It goes a long way in streamlining your PR flow, reducing the number of reviews and reducing the overall review time. So it does two things. As the author of code, you think of Auto Review as your first AI-powered reviewer. It leaves comments on your PR. It gives you suggestions on maybe breaking down a complex PR into smaller ones if needed. And from a reviewer's perspective, Auto Review makes sure that the description makes sense. It's something that the reviewer is able to understand. And we also provide chat experiences for the reviewer while they're reviewing code. This is one great example of how we understood the pain points that our devs were facing and built solutions around it. With all of these investments, this understanding and these focused investments, it's actually been paying off. We've seen a 25% increase in developer satisfaction since we launched this program. So we start with a focus on friction points, baselining, sharing metrics, and then closing the loop with all of these other investments that we have.
Thanks, Preeti. All right, so let's move on to the next finding that was in our report, and understanding and improving developer experience pays dividends, but companies are struggling on how to do this. So let's take a look at some of the stats that were revealed through our research. So we asked companies, how are they measuring developer productivity? The results were shocking, but not surprising. And you'll see what I mean by this. Hold on to your hats, you're gonna love this section. The number 5 way, we're gonna start at the bottom, that companies are measuring developer productivity is change failure rate. Now, if you don't know what this is the percentage of time that a change in production results in some unexpected result, a bug, incident, whatever it is. Everyone's shaking their heads. I'm assuming you don't think this is a good way to measure productivity. All right. Number 4, hours worked. Very simple. However many hours you work, that's how productive you are. The more hours, the more productive. The less hours, less productive. Good measure? No. Don't throw anything at me. I didn't come up with these. This is what people told us. Number 3, story points. Now, people ask me about story points all the time. I don't know why, but they do. Now, story points are, in my opinion, a really good estimation tool. They are not a measure of output, but for some reason, people like to use it. It's a measure, you can measure something, they use story points. It's not something that we recommend. Number 2, deployment frequency. One of the DORA metrics, I can see maybe why, but this is basically about how frequently developers are shipping code to production. The top way people are measuring productivity is the amount of code written, lines of code, counting lines of code. Who thinks that this is a good measure? No. Not many. Well, guess what? The people using those measures agree with you. Only 50% of people who said they use these measures actually think they're effective. I was surprised about 50%. I thought it'd be lower, but only half the people who actually use these are finding them effective. But it begs the question, if they don't find them effective, why use them? Now, my theory is that it's because they don't know what else they should be using. They don't know how to measure developer productivity, and so they're just using whatever they can. Well, there's a good reason why they don't know how to measure developer productivity. You can't measure developer productivity. Academics have been trying to measure knowledge worker productivity for decades. They cannot find a way to measure knowledge worker productivity. And guess what? Developers are knowledge workers. Across the industry, we can't even agree on what the word productivity means. So I don't see how anyone is even thinking that they're measuring productivity. Is it value for customers? Is it speed? Is it quality? Is it both? Neither? No one agrees. So, and also don't get me started on people measuring individual developer productivity. I could do a whole hour just on that. But there's always a but with these statements. Having said all of that, measurement is actually plays a very important role when it comes to improving productivity. And I'll explain why. Remember this, our earlier slide? A part of understanding your current developer experience is the ability to baseline points of friction that developers are facing. Now, I get heaps of objections to this on LinkedIn. People always message me, and I hear this voice in my head, oh, you can't improve what you don't measure. And they're right, you can't. But you should be measuring and improving the points of friction that developers face, which in turn will help them be more productive. Because what's the outcome here? We want to help people be more productive. Not the measuring of productivity is not the outcome that we're looking for. If you want some proof, everyone's saying yes. If you're watching online, everyone is saying yes. They want proof. Well, lucky I have some. So our research found that companies who spend more time understanding and improving points of friction for developers have more satisfied developers who are more productive, according to the developers. So measuring points of friction rather than productivity, then improving these points of friction results in happier, more productive developers. I know we have developers in the audience because everyone's nodding. Yes. Telling you things you already know.
Thank you, Andrew. So clearly you can't measure developer experience. So how do we go about it at Atlassian? One of the things that I want to caution you before we even start talking about measurements is that there's no one size fits all when it comes to how you do this. So, developer experience is unique to your organization because you are unique. Every organization is unique. So what worked for one organization is not just going to work out of the box for you. So how do we do this? We definitely take inspiration from DORA, from space, from all of the active research that's going on, and from other companies who've done this. And we've taken this inspiration, but we haven't replicated what they do. So we've taken all of these learnings and we've come up with our own measures based on what we have learned. And one thing though, we firmly believe that creating software is a team sport. So with all of this context, let's look at the measures that Atlassian has. So we look at developer satisfaction. This is a metric that's based on the qualitative survey. And then based on these surveys, we identified multiple points of friction. And what you see here with time from commit to deploy, PR cycle time, access to self-service documentation and self-service dependency maintenance, these are different points of friction and then which have resulted in measurements around it. We spoke earlier about auto review, which is one of the solutions that we use to reduce the PR cycle time. Another example is the focus on self-service documentation. When we did our surveys, devs told us that it is really hard to find the right documentation, especially for a company like ours. We are a microservices company. We are fairly large, distributed teams. So this becomes increasingly challenging, especially if you're looking for information for things that you don't work on or that you don't own. And what our devs told us is that they can find documentation, but is that the recommended one to use? Is that the most updated version to use? These things are pain points and that you just waste time. I know, because we used to waste time waiting for somebody in Sydney to respond to a question on Slack. So we looked at all of this and we revamped the documentation experience within Compass, which is our developer experience platform. So in Compass, you have a documentation section, and think of this as what the owners of that component want to share with somebody else who's looking for information. You can think of it as the vetted, trusted, whatever you want to call it, version of documentation that the owners are sharing with you. In addition, at Atlassian, of course, we are heavy users of our own tools, and Rovo Search is a game changer when it comes to documentation. So this is the AI-powered search experience that is built on the Atlassian platform, and it draws on information from multiple different sources: Jira, Confluence, SharePoint, Google Drive, Slack, anything that's connected to the Atlassian platform. I know the slide is talking about payments gateway, but I'm going to share something that happened yesterday. As I was preparing for this talk and I was thinking about our own developer experience, I remembered that our amazing leader who runs developer experience, Rebecca, had a document somewhere that went deeper into PR cycle time, and I wanted to find it. So I just used RovoChat and I asked it, what was the document where Rebecca talked about PR cycle time? And lo and behold, I have the answer within seconds. And what I love about it is that RovoChat gives me the sources that it used when it gave me this information, so I can go deep dive if I want to. Another way, just in terms of information sharing, right? Like, how many of you have glossaries within your organization because you use way too many acronyms and that constantly goes out of date? And I kid you not. We had an Innovation Week project where somebody built an integration into the Mac dictionary because it was such a common thing that people constantly keep running into. With AI now, I have that information right there within Confluence. I can figure out what does this acronym mean, not just the expansion of that acronym, but what does it do? I get a quick summary, project code names. All of these are just so much easier to search and get information, keeps you in the flow, reduces context switching. And so, again, in summary, these are the measures that we use within Atlassian to measure developer experience. And this is very important for us because it helps us get both qualitative and quantitative and helps us close the loop once we start focusing on these areas of friction. But more importantly, this is not a one and done problem. Once we solve these points of friction, we are nowhere close to being done. A good developer experience needs continuous investment because the friction points are going to shift elsewhere and you need to continue this cycle.
Thanks, Preeti. I'm one of the people in Sydney that Preeti is always waiting for, so sorry. All right, so we're going to move on to AI and the role of AI in developer experience. And so in our survey, we wanted to understand how people are using AI, what's working, what's not working. And we think that AI is actually going to play a huge role in developer experience if it's used in the right way. So I shared this stat with you earlier. 62% of developers are yet to experience significant productivity gains through using AI. Now, something to keep in mind, this survey was sent out in February this year. So in February this year, most of the AI capabilities for developers were around code assistance, code gen, autocomplete of code. Now, why wouldn't developers report getting extra productivity from using a code generation or a code assistant tool? Any guesses? That's a good guess. That's part of the answer. Very good. It's because 0% of developers actually complain about spending too much time coding. This is not from our survey. This is Andrew's stat, this is just from my experience. So you can quote me on it. The writing code part of a developer's role, that's a part of the job they like. That's not a source of friction. Developers are already experts in writing code. So while I think every developer should have access to a code assistant, and developers like using them, we like them, they are helpful, it's not a source of friction. So it's not going to improve developer experience because it's not solving a problem that developers are having. It can enhance developer experience because it does make it more enjoyable, it does remove some toil, but it's not solving problems that are already existing. So a recent survey from a company called Jellyfish, they wanted to find out how much time are developers spending coding. And they came up with about 30%. Now, take photos if you want. I reckon that 30% is too high. Because the developers I speak to, there's no way they're spending 30% of their time coding. Let's just go with 30%. That 30% of the job is a part of the job they like. The 70% or 68% of the job is the part where we need to help people out. No developer has ever said to me, man, I'm spending way too much time coding. Like, I feel like I need to go to more meetings, I need to write documentation. You know, no one says that. They're the points of friction. Tech debt, right? All the things that were in the survey, we saw the top 5, what they were. They're the points of friction, and that's where we can apply a solution like AI to help out. I wouldn't be applying it to the 30%.
Thank you, Andrew. So clearly, devs want to spend time writing code. We love doing that. So what is Atlassian's approach to using AI for engineering? We strongly believe that AI plays a big role in reducing friction and improving productivity, and we lean into it heavily. But as Andrew said, it's not about using AI for the sake of using AI, but it's about using it in the right place to solve a problem well. So we talked about auto review, we talked about rovo search, which are all excellent AI-powered experiences to remove friction. So I'll tell you a little more about how we assess when not to use AI. So we start with the friction that we want to eliminate, and we ask ourselves, is AI going to help? Are there any solutions out there that help, or is it worth us implementing a solution because it's going to remove this? If the answer is yes, we start with a very small cohort. We want to experiment, we want to learn. We also set up an enablement team because we want to support our devs as they onboard and start using these tools. And of course, we are out there measuring whether this is doing what we expected it to do. If it's successful, that's wonderful news. We roll it out more broadly. So let me give you another example. How many of you have been on call? How about alerts? Have you ever had a flurry of alerts? Any alert fatigue anywhere? Yeah, I fully agree with you. I feel your pain. So this is no different for our devs, and we were running into this ourselves. So what we invested in is an AI-powered alert grouping within Jira Service Management. So here we use AI to group similar alerts, and not only that, it also tells us when was the last time a similar alert was seen? Who fixed it? How did they fix this problem? So we rolled it out to a small cohort within Atlassian, and we actually found that this was reducing the cognitive load. It really helped remove some of that alert fatigue. You still have to go and figure out and see what you want to do to fix it, but it does reduce the MTTR, and it just helps you with that initial triage, and it makes a difference. Given its success, we've rolled it out across all of our engineering teams now, and we are getting very good feedback with this. So let's wrap up. Andrew started by introducing the State of Developer Experience report, and we talked about 3 big things when it comes to our understanding here. The first one was DevX misalignment between leaders and developers. The way to address this is ask your developers, run surveys, talk to them, understand the points of friction. Once you know what these points of friction are, prioritize them, baseline them. Measuring points of friction is a great thing to do. And finally, when it comes to AI, it can be a great asset in reducing and removing these points of friction. And again, close the loop. That's a great way to see whether the investments that you're making is working and to keep that virtuous cycle. That brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much for joining us. You can come visit us at the Atlassian booth in the expo, and Andrew and I will be around here for a few more minutes if you want to chat. Thank you again.
Thank you.